My name's Chuck Drayton, and I live on Mill Street in Foxboro, Massachusetts, which, to my great happiness, is right down the road from a place called Camp St. Augustine. And Camp St. Augustine is part of the history of our town. I was telling the two gentlemen that are standing in front of me here that I'm one of those guys that grew up in a house, and I'm still living in that house today, so I have about 70 years of experience in the area, and knowing Camp St. Augustine for 70 years was my pleasure. We had friends who ran the property back in the 50s and 60s, so we knew the area there. I was a lifeguard at a local lake down the way where the campers would come down and be able to take swimming lessons. That was the 60s and early 70s. And over the years, the campers changed, the administrators changed, but the property stayed the same. The reason I'm being talked to today, I guess, is because I know a little of this history, and also what happened to Camp St. Augustine after the year 2000 is, I guess, what I'm supposed to be talking about. In the year 2000, that was the last year that a group of campers from Boston came in and were able to take advantage of the countryside. The whole idea of this Camp St. Augustine was to be able to have place where kids from the city could come and have a really nice vacation, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or whatever they were allotted. This was going on from probably the late 1800s. This area used to be called a place called the Rock Lawn Farm, and they had a man and a woman here that brought in kids from the Boston area to be able to take advantage of the land, and they worked the whole area now that we're looking at Camp St. Augustine used to be cultivated. It used to be fields, and the kids used to work in the fields, and they used to, sell vegetables to maintain the property and to be able to have the kids there. But in 1900, the property was taken over by a group called SSJC, Society of St. John the Evangelist, SSJE, and they were out of Cambridge. And at that time, those people took over the property and really made it into a camp that had many, many different hats. During the 20s and 30s, the place was wiped out to be able to be used for women who had tuberculosis. They came in here, and that was the purpose of it. And after that, there was a choral group that came in during the summers. That was in the 50s, I guess, and 60s. And then in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, you had the groups from Boston, the kids coming in from the different towns that were located in the area. And it was a great experience for the kids. I'm talking to Dante and Anthony, who were the last group that came through here in 2000, and they obviously remember wonderful things about the property. They remember memories that they'll probably never forget. Capture the Flag was mentioned, going into the woods, the ropes course, the swimming pool. It's just things that kids that don't have that opportunity in Boston or in the urban areas to be able to do something like that here was a big plus. In the year 2000, the problem was that SSJE ran out of money and they were going to sell the property. Now the property has two sides on this Mill Street. One side was 20 acres and the other side was 18 acres. It was about 40 acres total. And word got out that SSJE was going to be selling it to a developer unless Foxboro was interested in buying it. So that's where we came in. I was one of the neighbors who heard this rumor, and it wasn't a rumor, it was a real fact. And we got together. Matter of fact, it was in John Davis's house, which is 2 houses down the road here, and all of us talked about what would happen if a developer got a hold of the property. It was prime property, beautiful for, we could have 10 houses on one side, 10 houses on the other side, and it would just change the whole look of the neighborhood. It would wipe out the history that was here, and all kinds of things would change, we felt, if Foxboro didn't show an interest in and purchase this land. So talks went on from 2002 to 2003. 2003, we formed a group called the Committee was the actual name here? The Committee to Preserve Camp St. Augustine. It was run by a gentleman named Bob Hicks, who lived 4 houses down, a little farther down on the west side. And Bob Hicks and a bunch of people who were in the administrative levels of Foxboro got together and found a way that we could present this to the town, and they would be very happy to, we felt that they'd be very happy hearing this presentation, that they'd want the town to be the purchaser. The points that we sold it on: number one, it would maintain the open space in Foxboro. We're very aware that developments are coming in constantly, and we wanted to, maintain the forests and the fields, and this was a perfect way to do that. Number two, conservation is a big thing in Foxboro, so our Conservation Commission was on board right away. Number three, the Recreation Department was interested because there were facilities here that they could add to their current facilities in town. They have a really nice booth playground and the pace and field areas, but they didn't have this beautiful area in the forest that they had: a swimming pool, a soccer area, cabins, all kinds of things that were just raring to be used by kids and children and whoever wanted to use it. So the big one for me, all those other things were very important, but the history of the area was huge. Since, like I mentioned, the 1850s, you have a group of people that had numbers of kids coming in from the inner city and being able to use the facilities. We didn't want that to stop. So that was one of the main reasons that our group, the Friends of Camp St. Augustine, formed. After the committee had convinced the town that it was a good idea, our nonprofit organization, the Friends of Camp St. Augustine, formed, FOXA. And FOXA had about 15 very active board of director members, and we did a lot of fundraising. We did a lot of renovating. We had a chapel that was our flagship project. The chapel was falling down, and the town gave us permission to renovate it, restore it, and put it up for use. And people from town could come and use it for, we had a $25 an hour fee, which was extremely low. And people could come in and get married in the chapel. They could have baby showers. It was just really nice that people that might not be able to afford something like this elsewhere could come to Camp St. Augustine and be able to use it. By the way, Camp St. Augustine, the name changed. The town gave it a new name, and they called it the CRRA, Cocasset River Recreation Area. Down the road a ways, they have the Cocasset River Park, which has baseball fields, an old swimming pool, hiking trails. So they merged the two together to be part of the Recreation Department. And that was the main use of it. They figured the Recreation Department would oversee the Friends of Camp St. Augustine, and we'd do what we could do through them. So over the years we had some wonderful fundraisers. One of the best ones was every year we had an annual Oktoberfest, or Autumn Fest we called it. The Autumn Fest took place usually in October, and we had vendor tables set up in the area that had the children's playground. We had about maybe 30 or 40 vendors in there that sold anything you could think of, arts, crafts. We had a giant pumpkin contest where the farmers came in with their pumpkins. We had a hay ride that brought the kids through rides through the woods. And all of the funds that we made for that day would go towards the renovation of the chapel, or the putting a sidewalk in the chapel, or being able to help the recreation all across the way get usable. Over the years, from 2004 to 2009, the Friends of Camp St. Augustine worked very hard to bring it into the shape that it is today. In 2009, the Recreation Department decided that they would like to have full control of the whole running of everything. We kind of had the fundraising, and we had our separate bank account, and we put it into things that we had the board felt that was the next thing to be needed. But the Recreation Department had other ideas, rightly so. And so at that point, 2009, we decided to disband, and it has since then been under the control of the Recreation Department. They've done a wonderful job. I go by here in my car often, and I think had it not been for us, this place would now be a giant parking lot for a very large development in the area. So I feel very happy that Dante Luna and his friend Anthony and everybody else are going to be having a reunion here coming up at the end of July, and they'll be able to have those memories and have those times that they will never forget again here.